Welcome friends to the Secret Doctrine webinar. This is our second class, and today we are going to begin exploring the Stanzas of Dzyan. They are 7 in the first volume, which is the volume that deals with the manifestation of the universe. What we are going to do today is to go through part of the first stanza, which describes the universe as it is still in a state of non-manifestation, a state of sleep. So the title for the first stanza is The Night of the Universe. And we have the first shloka. Shloka is a Sanskrit word that means verse, that says, "The eternal parent, the space, wrapped in her ever-invisible robes, had slumbered once again for 7 eternities." So we will read some of HPB's commentaries to this, and I will add some ideas or try to clarify what she's saying. So the first thing that we talk about, or that the shloka talks about, is the eternal parent, which is the space. So she says, the parent space is the eternal, ever-present cause of all, the incomprehensible deity. We have seen in our last meeting why space is used as a metaphor for the absolute reality. Now, that absolute reality is the absolute abstract space. It is a space that is immutable. If we look again at the shloka, we see that this eternal parent, the space, is talked as feminine. It says her invisible robes, and it says that the space was slumbering. So this space that the first shloka refers to is not really the absolute abstract space, which can admit no gender, even philosophically, that cannot be said to be sleeping or awake. The space that is asleep is let's say, the pre-cosmic space. It's the space that will awaken in the first differentiation, as we saw in our last class, and will manifest as eventually as the space that we know. So, but in any case, space as a concept is many times used to refer to the incomprehensible deity, as Blavatsky says here. So she says, space is the one eternal thing that we can most easily imagine, immovable in its abstraction, and uninfluenced by either the present or absence in it of an objective universe. So we discussed this also in our previous class. The space is immovable. Everything within space may move, but the space itself cannot move. How do you move space? Especially when we talk about, remember that we said the space that current science is talking about, the Einstein's relative space, in the Theosophical view is not really the space that can be bent or altered, but is the other aspect of space that is substance, which is part of or feels this space. So the space in itself is immovable and cannot be influenced by anything, even by the presence or absence of a universe. Blavatsky says it is without dimension in every sense and self-existent. Again, remember we talk about the 3 dimensions of space. Blavatsky says, no, those are dimensions of physical matter, but space admits any number of dimensions. It depends on what kind of matter you have there. Physical matter has 3 dimensions. Astral matter has 4, and other types of matter has more dimensions. So she says it is self-existent. Space is not created. It is always there. When the night of the universe, or during the night of the universe, space is in its absolute way, in its absolute state, and the relative space is like asleep, slumbering. It's not yet. It is taught in the Esoteric Catechism, neither limitless void nor conditioned fullness, but both. So this is also interesting because, for example, in the East, when Hinduism and Buddhism discuss the nature of the ultimate reality, in Hinduism there is a tendency to present this as a fullness, purna they call it. It's a Sanskrit word that means fullness. In Buddhism, they talk about emptiness, shunyata. Now, emptiness, of course, is applied in several different ways in Buddhism, but one of those is that ultimately speaking, there is nothing that exists with a nature of its own. So, Blavatsky says this space in the esoteric philosophy is neither fullness nor a void. It is something that is beyond the opposites. And when you, in meditation, if you get to a sense of quiet, silent space, you can perceive a certain reflection from this, because when there are no thoughts or no active perceptions in meditation, but you are aware, there is a sense that there is certain emptiness there is nothing in particular there, and at the same time there is this sense of fullness. There is a presence that fills everything, even though that presence is not some object of perception. So you can see how, in a certain way, this idea that the ultimate reality is neither emptiness nor fullness, or both at the same time, is very important. Otherwise, in our philosophical views, we tend to fall into one extreme or the other. The extreme of saying that everything is empty, or the extreme that says that, in the ultimate reality there is something there. And then Blavatsky says it was and ever will be. So again, this is uncreated. This is the nature of reality. Now, let us go back to this. We covered the idea of the eternal parent, the space. Now, this space was wrapped in her ever invisible robes. So what does this mean? The robes, Blavatsky says, stand for the noumenon of undifferentiated cosmic matter. So at the beginning of the cosmos, we have cosmic matter in an undifferentiated form. It means there is a homogeneous kind of cosmic matter. No atoms yet, no physical plane, of course, but even on the highest spiritual plane, there is this homogeneous substance which is undifferentiated, which we call the cosmic matter. This is what in the Bible is called the waters of the deep, or chaos in the sense of that which admits no structure, because there is nothing different. Everything is this substance, as I said, is homogeneous. So she says that the robes are the noumenon, the cause of this homogeneous cosmic matter. Therefore, it's a pre-cosmic matter or substance. Blavatsky would prefer to use substance, because spirit and matter at this point are not yet separate, not yet different. So there is a single substance, if you want to call it that way, not substance in the sense of something material, but substance in the philosophical sense, which is an essence. So she says these robes that the shloka is talking about are the cause of this homogeneous cosmic matter that will appear when the universe begins to awaken. So she says, it is not matter, the robes it's not matter as we know it, but the spiritual essence of matter. You see how the word spiritual and matter are together here. It's a spirit/matter substance, because there is no differentiation. And she says, and is co-eternal and even one with space in its abstract sense. So space and substance are two aspects of the same principle, as we have seen in the previous class. This root nature is a translation of the Sanskrit word Mulaprakriti that we have seen. This root nature is also the source of the subtle invisible properties, invisible matter, and the visible matter. It is the soul, so to say, of the one infinite spirit. So if we think of the absolute as the spirit, here she's using spirit, soul, and body in a symbolic way. So if you think of the highest principle, which would be the absolute, and you call that spirit, then these robes, this pre-cosmic substance, would be the soul, and then the matter, the manifested matter, would be like the body. So she's using this in an allegorical way. But at this point, as we discussed, spirit and matter are not yet different. So she says the Hindus call it Mulaprakriti and say that it is the primordial substance. It is the source from which akasha radiates. We also saw last week that akasha is the manifested cosmic matter before it differentiates in all the different planes, manifested planes. So we could say we have Mulaprakriti, that is pre-cosmic substance, and then a radiation or emanation from Mulaprakriti becomes akasha, the cosmic matter, the highest manifested matter. So we have here a little diagram in which you can say that the matter space, and I put matter there because the space is dealt with as being feminine. Actually, in the first version of the shlokas that she translated, which later on was corrected, it said the mother space, not the eternal mother, not the eternal parent. So if we have to assign a gender, and of course this is just philosophically speaking, it would be feminine. Some students ask Blavatsky, why is the first principle spoken of in a feminine way? And she says the feminine in all ancient traditions was the first principle of which you can say anything about. The absolute is beyond any gender, and you cannot say anything about it. But the first is this womb in which the active principle awakens, which would be the male principle, the masculine principle, philosophically speaking, and then that masculine principle acting on the womb and acting on that matter begins to generate the differentiation and all the entities in the universe. So we have that the mother space are the robes. Then there is the logos, that intelligence, that active principle that awakens and begins to generate a certain differentiation, and that is the logos. And the two of them together end up in the manifestation of cosmic matter, which is the manifested matter called akasha. So this is like the basic principles in manifestation. But we are not yet in the stage of manifestation. So we saw that the eternal parent, the space wrapped in her ever invisible robes, now had slumbered once again for 7 eternities. So there is this idea of a slumber, because at the end, when a universe, remember we talked about the universe being cyclic in the Theosophical view, when the manifested universe is dissolved, space doesn't disappear because it is an aspect of the absolute, but the pre-cosmic space falls into a state of latency. It is latent, it is a possibility, it's not wiped out, it's not dead, it just falls asleep, allegorically meaning that it remains as a possibility. And it remains as a possibility of being manifested for 7 eternities. Now, Blavatsky says the seemingly paradoxical use of the sentence 7 eternity, thus dividing the indivisible. Normally when we think of eternal, we think of something that is infinite in time, that is not divisible. She says this sentence is sanctified or approved in esoteric philosophy. The esoteric philosophy divides boundless duration into unconditionally eternal and universal time and conditioned time, which in Sanskrit is kanda kala. So the idea is that she's talking about, as we are going to see, of 3 principles related to the idea of time: the boundless duration, the unconditionally eternal and universal time, and the conditioned time. So 1, the duration, is the abstraction or noumenon, again the cause of the infinite time. So we have duration, which is the cause of infinite time. This is important because when we think of eternity, normally we think of what perhaps more technically speaking should be called sempiternity. Eternity as an extension, an infinite extension of time, is still within the experience of time, the passing of time. In eternity, in the way that we normally think of, there is past, there is present, and there is future. Past is infinite, future is infinite, but there is the passing of time. Now, this duration is a timeless principle. Of course, this is a very abstract sentence or concept, but there is the idea, philosophically speaking, that duration is beyond past, present, and future. Duration is the container within which infinite past, present, and infinite future may take place. So she says the duration is the abstraction or the cause of infinite time, which is kala in Sanskrit. The other is its phenomenon, its effect, appearing periodically as the effect of Mahat, the universal intelligence, which is limited within a cycle of manifestation. She introduces here the word manvantara. Manvantara is a Sanskrit word that is used to talk about when a universe is active. And then pralaya is a word that is used to talk about when the universe is in a state of sleep, as we are, as the universe is right now in this description. This is taken from the stanza 3. Blavatsky explains about these eternities in different places, but I thought that this was more appropriate to bring it here. Now, if we want to see this in a diagram, then we have the absolute timeless duration. Duration is an aspect of the absolute. It's non-manifested, it's not relative, so it's an absolute timeless duration. Within that, infinite time appears, the eternal infinite time, kala, and when manifestation begins, then we have the conditioned time that we know about. Now, she said manifestation begins as a result of the action of Mahat, the universal mind. So when the universal mind awakens or manifests, and that universal mind begins to act on this homogeneous cosmic matter, and then that action is the beginning of time, the beginning of space as we know it, the beginning of matter on all the different planes, the beginning of consciousness, conditioned consciousness, because this universal mind is the origin of consciousness as we know it. But we are not yet here at the level of manifestation. I'm bringing this so that we can see the whole picture, but we are still at a stage where there is a transition between the absolute time and the eternal infinite time. Actually, the eternal infinite time is still also like slumbering. Now, she says, by 7 eternities, eons or periods are meant. This is also something that is important to keep in mind. In Judeo-Christian tradition, we have the idea of eternity as this infinite time, infinite in the past, infinite in the future, as we were discussing. Now, Blavatsky says that is not a concept in Eastern traditions, and she even says that that was not a concept in the Hebraic tradition. But she says whenever the idea of eternity is mentioned in Eastern traditions, we mean a very long period of time, but it is a limited period of time. So, for example, the whole universe will take billions and billions of years, but at some point, the universe, as we are seeing, will come back to a state of rest. Now, the eternity would be the whole time that universe lasts. So that is the eternity. In this sense, this is more closely to the Greek idea of an eon, an age. There is the big age of the whole universe, and then there are smaller ages through which the universe passes. So she says the 7 eternities meant are the 7 periods of a manvantara, of a manifestation, extending throughout a Mahakalpa, or a great age, which are 100 years of Brahma. She's using here the Hindu chronology. They have all a complex chronology saying how long the universe will take, and they divide this eternity in different cycles. They say the whole universe lasts for 100 years of Brahma. Brahma is like the manifested deity. So the universe lasts for 100 divine years, which Blavatsky says is this number. We have here a big number, 311040, and 9 more zeros. So this is how, according to the Hindu literature or chronology, how long the universe lasts. And these are the 7 eternities. Within these 100 years of Brahma, there are 7 cycles, 7 big cycles. So we have seen the first loka, the eternal parent, the space, had slumbered once again, wrapped in her ever invisible robes, had slumbered once again for 7 eternities. Now the next shloka says, time was not, for it lay asleep in the infinite bosom of duration. So even though we are talking about all these cycles, time as we know it was not. When Blavatsky was asked, how can the space be sleeping for 7 eternities when time is really not, when there is no time there? And she says, well, the process of manifestation lasts 7 eternities, and there is a symmetry in the universe. Part of the Theosophical model of the universe is this kind of supersymmetry that science is postulating, where there is really a symmetry between everything that composes the universe. So she says we can infer that just as the manvantara lasts for 7 eternities, the pralaya, or the state of sleep, also lasts for the same period of time. But she says that we cannot really conceive these cosmic processes at a level where there is no space or time. So all this that we are talking about is allegorical. All this can only be perceived in the highest states of meditation by celestial beings. But at this point, time as we know it was not. And again, the idea that it lay asleep in the infinite bosom of duration. Remember, duration is the timeless, absolute container of what time will be. So Blavatsky explains, time is only an illusion produced by the succession of our states of consciousness as we travel through eternal duration, and it does not exist where no consciousness exists, in which the illusion can be produced, but lies asleep. Again, lies asleep is an allegorical way to say that it's latent. So she relates time with the changes in consciousness. And this is something interesting. We know that the psychological time depends a lot on consciousness. Things we enjoy seem to go by really fast. Things that we don't enjoy seems to be passing very slowly. Also, for example, if you try to catch a fly, we normally can't, because our perception of time must naturally be very different. If the fly is able to move its wings, I don't know how many times per second, then a second for the fly is obviously far longer than it is for us, because during that second, the consciousness of the fly is able to move, that wing for so many times. So we even see that people who are in some, accidents, they many times report that there is a change in consciousness and you see everything in slow motion. So obviously, because of the shock of the moment, consciousness changes the way that it works, and then time seems to be, slower. So in the Theosophical view, time is relative, not only on a cosmic level, but also on a personal level, and it depends on consciousness. Perhaps we could say that the cosmic time, not the psychological time, but the cosmic time in the universe, depends on the consciousness of the universal mind. Time as we know it, the objective chronological time, may be an expression of the kind of consciousness of Mahat, the universal mind. So because there was no universal mind, because there at this point of the night of the universe, there was no consciousness anywhere, then there was no time. It stayed only as a possibility. So this is the next point. The universal mind, Mahat, was not. For there were no Ahi, which is a name for celestial beings, to contain and hence manifest the universal mind. So the idea here, as we are going to see how she's introducing different basic principles, or the book of Dzyan rather, is introducing the basic principles of the universe. First space, then time, then consciousness or intelligence in this third sloka. So because there were no celestial beings to manifest the universal mind, then the universal mind was not. Again, we can say that there is an absolute mind, mind as a possibility, mind as an aspect of the absolute, but that absolute mind is not manifested, is not relative. So during this state, mind is just a possibility. When the celestial beings manifest, then this absolute mind begin to manifest through them. So in a certain sense, you could say that these celestial beings are like the brain of the universal mind, of Mahat. So let's see what Blavatsky says. A noumenon, a cause, the origin of something, can become a phenomenon, or the effect, or can show a certain appearance, can show itself on any plane of existence only by manifesting on that plane through an appropriate basis or vehicle. So here you see this basic duality that we were talking about in the previous class, that is intrinsic in the manifested universe. You may have a principle of intelligence, for example, in this case, but it can only be manifested if there is some material vehicle to express it. So matter and spirit, subjective and objective, to be manifested, the two of them need to be differentiated, and then they interact with each other. So she says, for example, she gives an example, during deep sleep, when we are sleeping and there are no dreams, there is no mental, conscious mental activity, during deep sleep, ideation, or the process of thinking, ceases on the physical plane. You see a person that is sleeping. If the person is not dreaming, is not in REM, is not moving, you see that the mind is not manifested in any way through the body. So she says, for the time being, mind is not, because the brain is not acting as a vehicle for the mind, which the person still has a mind, but that mind is not manifested. When the brain awakens, then the mind appears and can manifest. And she says, mind is not, because the organ through which the ego, which means that the soul, manifests on the material plane, has temporarily ceased to function. So you see this principle that she is bringing up. There are certain things that are eternal, that are always there. However, they can only manifest when the appropriate vehicle of expression is formed and is active. Now, who are these ahi that she talks about? She says the ahi, and she uses the word Diane Chohans. This is a word that you will see used in the Secret Doctrine very frequently to talk about or to refer in a general way to the celestial beings, to angels or devas. So there are many gradations of Diane Chohans, many levels of intelligence. The ahi are one of the highest Diane Chohans, but let's see what Blavatsky says. The ahi, Diane Chohans, are the collective hosts of spiritual beings who are the vehicle for the manifestation of the divine or universal thought and will. So as we said, the ahi are these celestial beings that appear at the beginning of manifestation, and it is through them, through these very high beings, that the universal mind manifests. You see, the idea here, the way Blavatsky or the book of Dzyan portrays this, is in a very different way as to how we normally conceive things. We normally think of God as one entity, and that entity is intelligent and has similar features to us. Now Blavatsky says intelligence is a principle in the universe, is an impersonal principle in the universe. Because it is impersonal, it is eternal, it is impartial, it is immutable. And then that abstract impersonal principle manifests through different beings. So when we talk about the universal mind, we are not talking about one God that is separate from nature. The universal mind is the principle of intelligence that pervades everything, and any form is an expression of the universe or expresses the universal mind to some extent. Now, how well the universal mind, which is everywhere, which is part of the fabric of the universe, how well that universal mind can be manifested depends on how good the vehicle of expression is. Right now we have sound waves and light waves, all kinds of waves around us. They are unmanifested unless you create some kind of technology that can manifest it. So you cannot perceive the radio waves by means of a cup. The cup obviously cannot bring the radio waves into manifestation, but a radio can, for example. So in the same way, a stone, the universal mind is in the stone, and all the laws of chemistry and physics are expressions of the universal mind. But that is all that a stone can allow, that the structure of the stone can allow. In a human being, that same universal mind expresses as thinking, feeling, willing. So you see, the difference is the vehicle. So the universal mind is there as an abstract, all-present principle. When the Ahi, these high celestial beings, manifest, then this universal mind begins to manifest through them. It is the intelligence of these Ahis that will begin to generate the process of manifestation, and this intelligence of the Ahis is simply the intelligence of the universal mind going through them. So this happens when manifestation begins. But remember, at this point, there was no universal mind, manifested universal mind, because there were no Ahis. So she says, during the long night of rest, called Pralaya, when all existences are dissolved, the universal mind remains as a permanent possibility of mental action, or as that abstract, absolute thought, of which mind, as we know it, is the concrete relative manifestation. So you see, we could say that another aspect of the absolute, we have absolute abstract time, which is the duration, absolute abstract motion, absolute abstract space. We can add this absolute abstract thought, which is the origin of mind. Anything that is in the universe has to have an aspect in the absolute, and saying that the absolute has aspects is just a concept. The absolute is the source of anything that may manifest. So if there is a mind, it is because it was a possibility in the absolute. If there is time, it is because there was the possibility of time there. So in that sense, we can say that, any principle, manifested principle, must find its aspect in the absolute. So the Ahi then are these collective celestial beings that manifest the universal mind. Here there is a little diagram. We have this absolute mind, which is just a potentiality. When the Ahi appear, then the universal mind begins to express itself in the form of what Blavatsky calls Mahat. So you see, here again you could say this is spirit, this is soul, this is body. Or you could say this is the consciousness, this is the vehicle of consciousness, and then this is the expression, the manifested expression. Now remember that at this point there is only absolute mind, neither Ahis nor universal mind. Now, next one. So Blavatsky says the 7 ways to bliss, or not Blavatsky again, this is how she translates it. She says, I translated these shlokas that are in a different language, and she said that she skipped many of the shlokas because they were they would not be understandable by people. So the rendering that we have of the shlokas, maybe a paraphrase, maybe how Blavatsky chose to translate them. So we don't really have the original source, what the shlokas in the book of Dzyan look like. But what we read here is Blavatsky's rendering of it. So it says, the 7 ways to bliss, and she says moksha or nirvana. Moksha is the state of liberation in Hinduism. Nirvana is used mostly in Buddhism, and is again this state of bliss, the bliss that comes from the non-limitation or the non-manifestation of the conditioned consciousness. So these 7, she says, there are 7 ways to bliss, but these were not. The great causes of misery, Nidana and Maya. Again, Nidana is a Buddhist term that talks about this concatenation of causes and effect, and Maya means illusion. So the great causes of misery, which are these, the causes and effects and the illusion, were not. For there was no one to produce these causes and to get snared by them. So again, the 7 ways to bliss were not, the great causes of misery were not, for there was nobody to produce these causes and to get trapped in them. So she explains, there are 7 paths or ways to the bliss of non-existence. You see, nirvana normally is interpreted in Buddhism as the dissolution of being, the dissolution of the self. Now Blavatsky says that is only one side of what nirvana is. Yes, there is a dissolution of a separate self, but this is not simply nothingness. When a separate self is dissolved, there is something there, completely unknown, completely unconceivable by us, which she says, for example, the bliss of non-existence. She would talk about this as conscious non-consciousness. There is no consciousness as we know it. However, there is something there which we cannot grasp. So this is a difference in how the Theosophical view looks at nirvana as opposed to the Buddhist view. So there are 7 paths or ways, she says, to the bliss of non-existence, which is absolute being. Again, being and non-being in their absolute nature, they are the same. So this bliss of non-existence is absolute being, absolute existence, and absolute consciousness. They were not these paths or ways because the universe was so far empty and existed only in the divine thought. So it was only a possibility, the universe, and therefore there wasn't still neither bliss nor suffering. This belongs to the existence of beings. So this talks about what is the state of the universe when it is dissolved. Remember that the universe, consciousness, is a principle in the universe. Substance is a principle in the universe. So some kind of consciousness, this conscious non-consciousness, for example, some kind of matter, this non-material root substance, they have to remain in the universe in some way because they cannot be just be destroyed. They fall back into a state of latency. Now, what is this state? Blavatsky, or the stanzas here, or the shlokas, say it is neither bliss nor suffering. Bliss and suffering, pleasure and pain, belong to the duality of consciousness. There is a state that we could call a state of perfection, which is beyond all pair of opposites. In a conversation with students, they asked Blavatsky, so are the ahi in a state of bliss? And Blavatsky said, how can there be bliss? Bliss can be there only as a contrast to suffering. This is a state that is beyond our concepts of bliss and non-bliss. And again, all these things can be perceived in deep meditation, at least glimpses of this, reflections of this. You can see in deep meditation how many times we think of bliss as some kind of pleasurable sensation, But in deep meditation, any sensation, whether pleasant or unpleasant, disturbs that other state which is beyond, which you would not define neither as pleasant nor unpleasant, but that is far more powerful or right or perfect than pleasure and pain. So the universe at this point is in a state that is far deeper than what we call bliss and suffering. When touching this far deeper state, you can realize how pleasure and pain are superficial, both of them. So this is part of what Blavatsky or the shloka is trying to say. The state in which the universe is now is a state of perfection. You know, we normally think that the dissolution of the universe is something bad or something negative, that the good thing is when the universe is, active. But actually, when everything goes back to its true nature, that is the true nature, and that is a state of perfection. That is what we seek for in meditation. We are trying to go from the manifested aspect of consciousness to this unmanifested state of beingness, which is a perfect state in itself. Now, Blavatsky says the Nidanas the 12 Nidanas are the causes of being. Each is the effect of its antecedent cause, and a cause in turn to its successor. So you can study the idea of the Nidanas in Buddhism. It's a description of 12 causes and effects. Each cause becomes an effect, and that effect becomes a cause of another effect. From this, you begin with ignorance, and you end up with the fear of death and the suffering that is a nature of the embodied being that is a human being. So we cannot go into that right now, but you can study about this in Buddhism. Now, Maya, the other concept that is there, the causes of suffering, the causes of misery were not. One was the Nidanas, the other Maya. So Maya or illusion is an element which enters into all finite things. For everything that exists has only a relative, not an absolute reality. Since the appearance which the hidden noumenon, the hidden cause, assumes for any observer depends upon his power of cognition. This is a very deep statement. There is a cause, there is a true nature of anything in the universe. There is a reality. How that reality appears to us depends not on the reality itself, depends on our own power of cognition. For example, if we would have senses that can perceive the microwaves that are in the environment, if they were visible to us, we would see objects with an added dimension. We would see whether the object is warm or cold, for example. If we would have senses that can perceive ultraviolet waves, then we would see the universe in a different way too. For example, it is said that the dolphins, they can emit a sound which, when they are at the bottom of the ocean, that sound penetrates in the sand, and then if there is a fish, that there are some fish that they hide under the sand. If there is a fish there, they can see it. They can see it by means of something that they perceive as a sound. They send this sound goes under the sand, it bounces off, comes back to their brain, and their brain turns that into some kind of optical vision. So for the dolphin, the sand is transparent. That's what. So how we perceive the universe depends completely on our senses, how our senses are developed. If our senses were different, then the appearance of the universe would be different for us. So she says, the reality is always hidden. The reality, the thing as it is always hidden, and we can only perceive this on the spiritual planes, when by means of uniting our consciousness with the reality. But other than that, whenever you perceive through senses, physical senses or psychic senses, anything that mediates the perception, then all you will see is the filter, is the illusion that those senses are presenting to you. So that is the concept of Maya, illusion. We relate to things not as they are, but as our senses present them to us. And why do the senses do this? Well, because this is the way that we can manage to relate to reality. You know, there are some experiments. Scientists now they are discovering that the brain is not designed to show you reality. It's designed to show you a certain symbolic reality, so that you can deal with this and the physical survival, so that the physical survival is possible. You know, the brain is interested in your physical survival. So they say the brain is designed not to show you reality, but to show you what you need to survive. So this is not different from what we do on the computers. You know, you are watching right now something on the computer. Do you think that this image is somewhere in the hard disk of the computer? It is not. All that there is in the hard disk is these ones and zeros, which is not even ones and zeros. It's this, you know, electricity coming on and off, which is translated as a code, ones and zeros. And then there is a software that makes this appear in a way that you can relate to. So when you click on an icon on the desktop of your computer, that little square that may be like a page is nowhere in the computer. The computer is showing you an icon, an illusion, a form, so that you can use the computer. That is what the brain does. Shows us the world in a way that we can relate to. Now, the way that the brain shows it to us is perfectly fine to survive physically, but then it produces a lot of problems spiritually. We perceive each other as being separate. We perceive each other, you know, as being in conflict. When we perceive each other on the spiritual planes, we perceive a completely different story. But this is what we call illusion, Maya. The phenomena, the appearance of the universe, is determined by our powers of cognition. Nothing is permanent except the one hidden absolute existence, which contains in itself the noumena of all realities. So only the cause of the hidden cause of everything that we see is permanent. All the rest is always changing. And she says the existences belonging to every plane of being, from the highest spiritual plane down to the lowest material one. She says up to the highest Diane Chohans, up to the highest celestial beings, are to a certain degree of the nature of shadows cast by a magic lantern on a colorless screen. Today we would say they are just like the movies that is you see in the theater on the screen. It's just a play of lights. The only thing that is permanent there, that is immutable, that is not tainted in any way, is the colorless screen that is behind. On this screen, a series of colors are projected. They display motions, characters, this and that. That is impermanent. At some point the movie ends, and the only thing that remains as it ever was is the white screen behind. So she says the whole manifested universe is a drama too. It's a drama on a theater for the purposes, we cannot go into this right now, but it's for the purposes of producing certain consciousness, evolving certain kind of consciousness, but it's a drama. The drama of evolution is a movie in a certain sense. And the only thing that is permanent is that perfect, absolute container within which everything takes place. So she says, yes, everything is an illusion. However, but all things are relatively real for the cognizer, who is also a reflection, and the things cognized are therefore as real to him as himself. This is where the Theosophical approach differs from the non-dualistic approach, for example. Typically, in non-duality, they say exactly the same as Blavatsky is saying, the only thing that is permanent is the absolute reality, this immutable, this background, and everything else changes. But then in this particular approach, the non-dual approach, there is the approach is based on denying reality to any manifestation. So everything you perceive is an illusion, and there is a playing down, if we want to put it that way, of the value of that illusion. The reason for this is that we are so attached to the illusion that we need to learn and to begin to realize that these things we are attached to are not the reality. So you play down to make an impact in consciousness and say, go beyond all this. And that is perfectly fine. It's an approach to the spiritual path. In the esoteric philosophy also has the same principle behind, but it says, for on each plane, if you are perceiving on a particular plane, what you see around is relatively real, because you on that plane are as illusory as the things that you are perceiving. But on a relative plane, to you, this is real. So you can only see the unreality of this by raising your consciousness to a higher plane. From the higher plane, looking down, metaphorically speaking, you can realize the unreality of the lower plane. But when you are in a plane, everything is perceived as a reality. What does this mean? Well, it has some implications in the esoteric philosophy tries to generate Mahatmas or occultists or adepts that learn the rules of this illusion so that they can help in this drama of evolution, which is like a movie, but it has an effect on consciousness. So they don't dismiss the illusion. They try to study the illusion, recognize that it's an illusion, but they get involved with the illusion to help these sparks of consciousness that are developing. It's like you have a game of chess. The game itself is an illusion. You create the rules, you create the pieces. When you play, you are abiding by a certain arbitrary rules. So you may say, okay, I know that this is just a game, but I will engage with it for a particular purpose. Or you can say, this is all made up. I don't want to have anything to do with this. So that sometimes is what mystics tend to go more on that side, saying, I don't want to have anything to do with the illusion. Occultists tend to go through on the other side. I want to perceive reality, but I accept to be engaged in the game for the purpose of helping the evolving consciousness. Both paths are perfectly fine and good. And I think it's good to have both things in mind, even though each one of us may have a tendency to in one way or the other. So Blavatsky says, whatever plane our consciousness may be acting in, both we and the things belonging to that plane are, for the time being, our only realities. As we rise in the scale of development, we perceive that during the stages through which we have passed, we mistook shadows for realities. And the upward progress of the ego from the Greek, not like in the psychological modern sense, ego is the sense of the pure sense of I-ness. So, and the upward progress of the ego is a series of progressive awakenings, each advance bringing with it the idea that now, at last, we have reached reality. So you awaken to a certain state of consciousness and you say, yes, that was all illusion. Now I can perceive the truth. But Blavatsky says this is something that happens repeatedly, but only when we shall have reached the absolute consciousness and blended our own with it, shall we be free from the delusions produced by Maya. So there is this progressive perceiving that is closer and closer to reality until we are not separate from reality any longer. Of course, we were never separate, but that was the illusion that we were separate. So there is this progressive awakenings until there is the blending of ourselves and reality, and there is the realization that we are nothing but that absolute universal reality. Only then Maya is over. And the last shloka we are going to discuss today, darkness alone filled the boundless all, for Father, Mother, and Son were once more one, and the Son had not awakened yet for the new will and his pilgrimage thereon. So there is the idea of Father, Mother, and Son, which were one, were not separate, and again the idea that the Son had not awakened for the new will and his pilgrimage in this new will. So therefore, darkness alone filled the boundless all. So Blavatsky first talks about this idea of darkness and light. She says that light is inconceivable except as coming from some source which is the cause of it. And as in the instance of primordial light, that source is unknown, though as strongly demanded by reason and logic, therefore it is called darkness by us from an intellectual point of view. When we talk about the absolute or the unmanifested states of the universe, many times they are referred to as darkness because they cannot be conceived, they cannot be perceived. They are darkness to our intellect. And there is something important here, because this, again, all these are hints to guide us in our own spiritual path of discovery of what we really are, in our own meditation. It is by going always in the direction of the darkness of the silent and the non-perception within ourselves. It is by always chasing after this darkness that we can keep on going. If we are contented with any level of perception, if we in meditation all we do is to think about things, to perceive things, to pay attention to what the senses bring, to use our, any faculty of our mind, as long as we are within the realm of the known, within the realm of what we are familiar with, then we are stuck there. The way to break through to the next plane that Blavatsky was talking about, to have this new awakening, is to go chasing after the darkness of the silence and the non-perception. This was discovered by every mystic. If you read The Cloud of Unknowing in Christianity, or the writings of Pseudo-Dionysius, you will see that they always talk about go into this divine darkness, plunge yourself into this cloud of not knowing, of unknowing. So in the perfect state, darkness alone reigns. So if we are going to go in that direction, in our own meditation, we have to dwell in silence. We have to direct our attention to the darkness, the divine darkness of the non-perception. So it is darkness both in the experience, at the level of the experience in meditation, and it is darkness from a philosophical, intellectual point of view, because it's whatever is beyond what we can explain. And she says this: it must not be forgotten that we give names to things according to the appearances they assume for ourselves. We talked about how we only perceive as appearances, and we give a name to these appearances. We call the absolute darkness, so this absolute reality is called darkness, because to our finite understanding it appears quite impenetrable, yet we recognize fully that our perception of such things does not do them justice. This is taken from the second stanza, but it was appropriate, I think, to bring it up here. So when we talk about darkness alone, is because we are talking about this thing that cannot be perceived, that is unnameable, that is undefinable. This is the only thing that was there during the night of the universe. According to the tenets of Eastern occultism, darkness is the true actuality. Light is matter, and darkness pure spirit. Darkness, in its radical metaphysical basis, is subjective and absolute light, while the latter, in all its seeming effulgence and glory, is merely a mass of shadows, as it can never be eternal, and is simply an illusion or Maya. So, light has to be always artificially produced, by turning on the light, by creating a sun, light is something that comes and goes. Whatever is left is darkness. Life is something that manifests but has to be sustained. So darkness is the background for all light. So in this sense, darkness is a good symbol for the ultimate reality. And also, even with the regular light, the light becomes brilliant, becomes visible when it bounces off some kind of matter. Light in the universe, in the cosmos, when there is no matter in between, for example, if there is no matter between the sun and the earth, light is dark. Light comes up as something visible only when it reflects on an object. So even physical light, in its essence, is dark. When the whole universe was plunged in deep sleep, had returned to its one primordial element, there was neither center of luminosity nor eye to perceive it, and darkness necessarily filled the boundless all. Darkness, then, is the matrix in which the sources of light appear and disappear. As to borrowed or secondary light, whatever its source, it can be but a temporary Mayavic or illusory character. So this is what we have been discussing. And then the last part, remember, Father, Mother, and Son were once more one, and the Son had not awakened yet for the new will and his pilgrimage thereon. The father/mother, are the male and female principles in root nature, the opposite poles that manifest in all things on every plane of the cosmos, or spirit and substance still as a unity. In a less allegorical aspect, the resultant of which, of spirit and substance, is the universe or sun. So Father is the spirit, Mother is the substance, and out of that interaction, the universe comes up. So at this point in the pralaya of the universe, Mother, Father, and Son were one. So we have here this diagram for the manifestation of spirit, substance, and the universe. And they are once more one when in the night of Brahma, during the Pralaya, all in the objective universe has returned to its one primal and eternal cause, to reappear at the following dawn, as it does periodically. To put it more plainly, Karana, the cause of the universe, is alone during the nights of Brahma, during the nights of the universe. The previous objective universe has dissolved into its one primal and eternal cause, and is, so to say, held in solution in space, in suspension in space, to differentiate again and crystallize anew at the following manvantaric dawn, which is the commencement of a new day or new activity of Brahma, the symbol of the universe. So the idea, she brings the example of crystallization. You have a solution, everything is held in suspension there, and at some point that crystallizes and precipitates. So everything is like in this, the universe is like in this homogeneous solution, and at the dawn of the manvantara it precipitates in the different forms. And finally, the wheel. The sun had not awakened yet for the new wheel and his pilgrimage thereon. The idea of a wheel is the symbolical expression for a world or a globe, which shows that the ancients were aware that our earth was a revolving globe. So she says the ancients knew that the earth was round, when in the West we thought it was flat, and that it was revolving, because they talk about wheel. The wheel implies a revolution. So the idea is that the universe had not awakened for the process of evolution. In other places, Blavatsky also says that wheel is a symbol for the cycles of evolution. So basically, the pilgrimage is this evolution, but the universe and everything in it had not awakened to start their evolution or its evolution on different planets. So this is all for today, and I hope to see you next week. Thank you.